hopefully, as we have worked our way through this wonderful, enriching passage, all of us would have deepened our relationship with God. It's ironic that when Paul writes this letter, he'd be writing to a carnal church to help them understand that love is far deeper than just what they thought. They thought that love was having the spiritual gifts, bragging about them, comparing themselves, being loveless towards somebody who had sinned, and sadly seeing it as being loving. And so through this, Paul would deal with the church and help them understand just what love always does. When I was growing up as a child, there was a little caricature called Love Is. I'm not quite sure if any of you were young enough for those days. Do you remember that little caricature in the back of the magazines and newspapers? Love Is. Now, the author of this lady was born in 1947 in New Zealand. She was 26 years old when she met her future husband, Robert Casali. The two of them were at a ski club and they started dating. And what she'd do is she would send him a postcard, and on that card she would doodle a little caricature of herself, basically telling him just what love was. She used to write those on little cards, and eventually when they got married, she'd put it in his pocket, under his pillow, in his jacket, in his cubby hole, and even in his drawer. Basically, later on when she went to work, she worked for a printing company, and then she put together all those little caricatures of hers and sold it for $1 a piece. And this eventually was syndicated all over the world to about 50 countries. And she sold it just for $1. Can you imagine? I still remember the Argus having this. Huge success. And even when we look at all these kind of things, I remember when Sue and I were dating, Sue used to send me, what is that writer's name? Helen Steiner Rice. I cannot begin to tell you how much of that I have. You did send it to me, Sue. It was all about how much she loved me and all that kind of stuff. Boy, those were the good old days. But anyway, and anyway, this young lady would say things like the following. She said, love is always kissing each other goodnight. Love is always looking on the bright side of life. Love is always looking beautiful in his eyes. But isn't that amazing that really, if you look at love, it really just colors the world and it just looks so much brighter and it looks so much more beautiful. In fact, it was interesting. Sorry, I mustn't do that. There's some interesting research that has gone around many years ago, and apparently what does happen is when you do fall in love, your pupils dilate. But there's also more about falling in love. Apparently dopamine is spiked and it improves your eyesight. In fact, you can see colors more clearly. You can see the person for who they are more clearly. And it also, what it does is it also suppresses your ability to logically process things. And IQs have been known to drop by 21 to 22 points. So your ability to process logically what's going on around you also is compromised. Boy, what a wonderful thing to fall in love. She would have remembered Helen Steiner Rice. But anyway, 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 7, Paul writes to us and he says, love always protects, love always trusts, love always hopes, and love always perseveres. And brethren, these are just wonderful passages that speaks of such warmth within God's family. And I would imagine while Paul was writing this, he was saying to the church, boy, if only we could achieve this goal. Many other translations in the first place, speaking about protecting, it mentions that love bears all things. Now, sometimes it would convey the idea of tolerating someone, but that's not entirely true. It is something far greater than that. The root word in the Greek actually means to protect. It has the view of protecting the other person, covering from the elements. And we protect each other, the one that we love. When I sit with couples in a room, I say to them, you need to actually discard your spelling of love. Rather, don't look at love as Love, but look at it as safe, Safe, keeping each other safe. And so even though we are walking into a very difficult component of trying to resolve something, just keep each other safe. It has the same import as an elder that protects the church, a husband that protects his wife, or a parent that protects their children. And so what Paul is writing to them, he says, I want you to know that love is seen when you always protect that which you love. In fact, Jacques Cousteau and many of us have watched his programs when we were younger. He says, you always protect that which you love. He was the guy, I think, that invented the aqualung. And in fact, what he did was he dived deeply. And in his ability to be able to dive, he then discovered just such incredible beauty. And he was the forerunner of us protecting and taking care of our seas. When we have something of value, we always protect it. We put it in a safe. We put it in a safe place. When we love someone that has departed, especially in the case of Annaline and Tom and the family, you protect that memory in your heart. You look after it. There's a safe space that you put for that particular person. But that's not what love does. Love also protects others. Love also protects the other person with whom we are in a relationship. We look at Jesus' earthly father, Joseph, and the text specifically says in Matthew chapter 1, verse 19, that he made a conscious choice when he discovered that Mary was pregnant by the Holy Spirit, that he literally did not want to expose her to public disgrace, or he could have divorced her quietly. Matthew 1:19. He was determined to keep things quiet. In other words, brethren, same in our environment here, that when somebody has done something wrong, we don't go around blurting it all over the place. It is inappropriate to gossip. It's inappropriate to share confidential things about the private lives of people and somehow think that you are doing what is right. Love never, ever does that. Love always protects. The church provides that safe space that they will never break the confidence. Love protects the people whom we love. Psalm 68 verse 5, God tells us that he is a father of the fatherless and a protector of the widows. And that is why our widows in our family are treated with respect. We always make them know that you can call, that you can talk. In fact, sometimes when a widow is out of line and we might feel the compulsion to call her in and probably be a bit harsh, God cautions us, be careful, because she's a person that is very close to the heart of God. God's church is a safe place, an environment where you can be loved and be cared for by everyone else. It's sad when we watch on the news and we see that there are pastors that are now being brought to justice because of what they do in the quiet and how they hurt people. It's sad when that happens, even in America, where that kind of thing happens. And that is why in the church it is so important that we guard and we take care of and we look after. For non-church going people, they often feel very vulnerable. They often feel that when they walk into our environment, that they may be judged and criticized, and in fact will be laid bare and embarrassed. You see, sometimes what we find joy in is to preach a fire and brimstone lesson that will cause discomfort. And I'm sure that there is a place for it. However, there is a larger place for it to be able to help people see that they've come to the right place, where God will help them deal with their sin, strengthen them to repent from their sin and become close to God, and that they walk into a safe haven that loves them and takes care of them. we also find that we love to help people to live a better life. We want people to be strengthened, and therefore we encouraged. We stand by with those who are vulnerable and are mistreated. And I want to just say that's exactly what has been happening to our congregation at Riverview. She was vulnerable and she was mistreated. And we made a conscious choice the other day, coupled to 7 years of helping them, to consciously step in a real, physical, tangible way to help and to ensure that this beautiful bride of Christ will never, ever be subjected to that kind of humiliation. Love always protects. The second point of what Paul speaks, that is always. He says, it always trusts. Most translation says, believe all things. Now, you might think that love is gullible, that love will just swallow any kind of nonsense. But I think once again, what it speaks of in the real terms, it says love always trusts. And what it means is that love never ever entertains a suspicious mind. Walking around trying to ascribe motive to someone that you don't even know. And you're sitting and assuming that this is this person's heart. Or seemingly that someone else would say to you, no, this is what, and say, hold it. I know that person. How can you say that about them or about her? The truth of the matter is, brethren, you see, love always trusts. Love always thinks and looks for the favorable possibility in the human life. You see, sometimes we have this morbid fascination with why did he do that or why did she do that? Why not say, that's fine, let's help you change your behavior and be able to walk into an environment that is wholesome, that is caring and supportive. It is of late, in the last few years, and that's how frighteningly behind humanistic research is, that love is the most important attribute that helps people to find each other. It's called empathy, where I allow myself to physically understand intellectually what you're going through and being able to transcend my own selfishness to look from your perspective what life is about from your perspective. You see, brethren, before worship started, maybe one of you or all of you or some of you did not greet the other person. And there might be a lot of reasons for that. Maybe this morning you were worried about, did you put the stove off? Or did you lock the door? Did you set the alarm? We are living in troubled times. We are living in deep, difficult times where people have to be inordinately alert. And that's abnormal. And so when someone does not greet you or me, let's not do that. Let's assume the good. Always trust. When somebody says something bad about an elder or a deacon, always assume and say, hang on a minute, but that's not true. He did what? He said, no, man. Where did you get this from? Well, I thought that. No, you can't just thought in anything. The key behind it is that when we look at all these things, it always prevents us from jumping to conclusions. Brethren, there's a concept very little understood about people overthinking things. I'm not quite sure if you overthink things. Anybody want to put their hands up when you overthink things? I think too many. There we go. We overthink things. We analyze things. We really interrogate things. We try to think it from this perspective and that perspective. And you know what, brethren, it is okay, but what must guide your thinking, and I was just dealing with somebody yesterday, what must guide your thinking is the assumption that you will always trust that the person is trying to walk as close to God as is possible. Job's friends will show us how love does not act. Job was suffering terribly, and we read through the book of Job, and we often say, Lord, this is terrible what Job is going through. Job did not understand what he was going through. But all throughout the initial pages, we are told that he was an upright and a righteous man. In other words, in his heart, he did everything to do what was right in the sight of God. But you know what, brethren? Even his comforters came to him and they assumed the worst about Job. They were thoroughly convinced that his problems could only have been caused by sin. Job 22, Eliphaz starts listing all the sins that Job could possibly have done. And he tells him, you must be guilty of stealing, taking advantage of people, not providing to the needy. In Job 22, verse 5, he says, is not your wickedness great and your iniquity without end? Now, there's some things that you need to understand about this text because it is very heavily laden. In other words, the idea of all suffering of humanity will always be attributed to somebody being at odds with God. Yet we know the backstory to this, that in fact Satan was at work trying to draw him away and to prove the only reason that Job was in a relationship with God is to see what kind of benefit he could get from God. And so Job dashes that preconception by staying faithful to God regardless. And so here we find the innocent being crucified for something that they have not done. But love always should trust and say, Job, we don't understand what is happening here. Maybe God has got a greater plan above all things. And Barnabas is definitely the character that we love, that exemplifies the characteristic of love. When Saul of Tarsus was converted to Christianity, no one trusted him. They thought he was trying to infiltrate their ranks. But one guy by the name of Barnabas took a chance on Saul. In Acts chapter 9, 26 and 27, when Saul had come to Jerusalem, he tried to join the disciples, but they were all afraid of him and did not believe that he was a disciple. But Barnabas took him and brought him to the apostles. You see, brethren, sometimes what we do is we easily would allow our fears of assumption to literally push people away. And the truth of the matter is, you and I have got no right to that. You can't do that. You see, the best person probably that we know that loves us is our spouse. The person that would support and always trusts us. In terms of the way that we say, I will be there for you. I'll make sure that this, that, and that will be dealt with. Making sure that you can always be at your best, always to be trusted. In the third place, love always hopes. In another way, we can find that love is always optimistic. It always looks at things on the bright side. When the world would talk about failure, love would always see the possibilities of what it can be and say that this is not the end of the story, but a start of a great adventure for us to make things happen so that someone can be better than what they've started. Love always hopes. When Israel failed, God never, ever, ever gave up on them. The entire Old Testament story is this drama playing off among Israel where God tries to court his people. We know the story of Isaiah chapter 15 where he speaks to them and he says, I picked you up while you were lying in your blood, kicking and screaming, and then I washed you and I salted you and I tidied you up. I gave you a dress to wear so that you can look at your best, presenting yourself to me. Love always hopes. And that's what we do. That's what we do and what we thrive in. When somebody arrives in our family, they're feeling dejected, they're feeling their life is at an end, we say to them, but that's not true. That is not true. God has got a history of stick-to-itiveness that you and I must never give up on. Somebody might turn around and say, yeah, but you know, these people in Riverview has been carrying on for 7-8 years. That's minuscule. It is not even a wink of an eye in the sight of God. No, we always hope for better. We always hope for a good outcome. Why? Because love never ever dwells on hatred and other people's failures and relishing how they are disgraced. Cool it. And saying, this is where we're going. We can see people transform. We look at the blundering Simon, where Jesus calls him, Peter, you being my rock. If ever there was a guy that says what you and I think, it was Peter. And yet he's got such a tough deal with Jesus. Jesus never played with him. Jesus said to him, before the cock crows, you would have, what's the English word for it? Denied me 3 times. But it didn't stay there. Jesus restored him again. In John chapter 21, 20 and 21. I want to tell you a quick story. Who's ever read an Adam Clarke commentary? Adam Clarke. Many of us have. If you're a serious Bible student, let me tell you the backstory of Adam Clarke. The commentaries are now over 200 years old. As a young boy, he was a very slow learner. He was not a very bright young man. His teachers once said to him, a visiting teacher says, this is one of the stupidest boys in the class, in the school. And a visitor called Adam aside and said to him with great kindness, he said to him, never mind what they say. You may be a great scholar one day. Just keep on working hard and don't be discouraged. Let me say this to you. Has anybody called you stupid? Has any called you a bumbling idiot? Has anybody said to you, you can't do this, you can't do that? Well, God will say that in God's kingdom, we never make those comments. We never ever put people and relegate them to uselessness. You see, brethren, it's not about the short journey or the momentary approval, but it's the long legs of perseverance that you and I will run into the arms of a God that is hopeful and He is prayerful for you and I. People need more hope than we can imagine. People need more hope from us to be able to know that you can get through this. In the 4th place, love always perseveres. Many translations would say always endures. But the Greek word here is a military term that means to sustain an assault on an enemy. Solomon wrote, many waters cannot quench love, nor can the floods drown it. Songs of Solomon, chapter 8 and verse 7. If there is something, brethren, that from my side that I cannot tolerate, and you need to know this, I don't like fair weather friends. You are my friend for life, through thick and thin. My wife will tell you I've got very few friends. But the friends that I have are people that stand with me and I stand with them through thick and thin. This is a two-way street. A street when you're going through greatness, we will celebrate with you. When you are going through difficulty, we will stand next to you and we will pick you up. We will hold up your arms and yes, if need be, we will dig into our pockets and we will make sure that you will have the resources to stand up again. You see, fair weather friends, they only want to walk on the scene when everything's going well and they look like part of the victors' crowd. They are liars and they are cowards. You see, brethren, let me say this to you. Many years ago, when I was still a student, I was 17 or 18 years old, I was at the university. And one particular professor made a comment which I'll never forget. He said, if you do not make sure and work for the kingdom interest here, you will have no right to it in the life hereafter. And that is why when he talks about persevering, he's saying that we never break rank. We always stay in formation. We always stay on the assault. And that is why when Jesus was talking to Peter, he says to him, Peter, who did people say I am? And then Peter said, well, some people say you're Elijah, some people say you're this and that. Then he says, who do you say I am? He says, well, you are the Son of the living God. Then he says to Peter, Peter, listen here. I will build my church on that one confession. That one confession. And the gates of hell will never prevail against it. Let me say this to you, brethren. So many times I've watched how the church would retreat and say, well, this thing is just becoming, stop that. Get up and let's fight back. Let's do what is righteous regardless. Let's do it with love and kindness and with perseverance. We never see the people lying on the floor and not pick them up that are in the midst of an army. We go there and pick them up. When people are discouraged in the midst of this war of moral depravity and all the rest of it, we don't walk away and say, well, this is just a bit too tough. No. We get in there and we say, come. Let's come alongside you. It's going to be fine. We have a false idea of love. And I love that song, and my wife said, please don't sing it. I feel the earth move under my feet. You know what I mean? That kind of love. That's very short term, isn't it? Sometimes you do get goose flesh when you talk about love, but it's not really that. Love is the kind of idea when it is an absolutely wonderful thing. When you engage each other and say, look, I need to talk to you. I need to get our relationship right. I want us to be able to honor God and to live a life of righteousness. Love is a struggle, but not a love that walks away from each other. Humorist Sam Levinson made a comment. He said, love at first sight, it's easy to understand. It's when two people have been looking at each other for years that it becomes a miracle. It's not really a miracle. You see, when you allow God to work through you and amidst of you, that things just become deeper and deeper. Did you know that there are therapy processes used, and I use it in my work, called EMDR? It's eye movement, and there's a whole lot of other stuff to that. When you actually talk to someone in conflict and they're sitting looking at each other in the eyes, and they start to look at each other, and you watch how their eyes soften in conflict. You see, brethren, this is the key. When you look into the eyes of Jesus daily in your worship time with God, and you study His Word and you contemplate Him and you pray to God and you say, Lord, I come before you this morning as a weak child. Father, I messed up. Father, I've got this task ahead of me, but Lord, I don't want to give up. I can't give up, Father. Perseverance means that you are well positioned in the middle of a violent battle. I got two things against me. This gentleman had summons me to court. He says that I've stolen money. Now let me tell you something today, brethren. I care very little what people say. Why? It's because I know. And I spoke to his heart and I said, please don't do things like that. He said many things about people that are over 75, 80 years old that I would never even say to an enemy. I would never make those kind of comments. But you see, brethren, when you are in the crosshairs of the evil one, you never ever respond to your natural instinct and run away. I say it again. That's a coward. You don't run away and try to justify it by some kind of cockamamie story that you want the world to buy for your cowardice. You must stand and fight. You see, brethren, being able to stand up to the pressure is what Jesus Christ did. Can you imagine if Jesus, who could have called 10,000 angels, had to say, genoeg nou, and said to them, just kill these people around me? You ask the question, what kept him on that cross? It was love that kept him like that. It was love that kept him like that. When he was losing every breath that he was taking and laboring through it. It was love that kept Jesus there. You see, brethren, when you look at the Passover, Jesus knew that his hour had come. But the word in Hebrews, John chapter 13 verse 1 says, he loved them to the end. He went all the way. He didn't stop halfway. He went all the way. And as Christians, brethren, you and I will face similar challenges. And then you ask the question, at what point you're going to give up? When it's all done. To the end. And that's about relationships. We treat each other kindly. We treasure them. We protect each other. The world would say we need to lash out. We say no. We can talk about it. We can find each other. We believe that there can be a good outcome. In conclusion, love bears when everybody else gives up. Lately, you will find that a lot of the times, humanistic, secular would speak about the concept of love. And they try to run around within their own world to define what love is. Yet, we find that the Bible speaks about love from Genesis right through to Revelation. It's of late that they will tell you that love is the perfect nurturing nursery to bring about change in the behavior of humanity. It was Jesus that personified that love. That when you and I come into the presence of God, taking the Lord's Supper and be reminded of my value in the presence of an awesome God, that is when I say, Lord, I'm done with that life. I'm done. You see, there's an old story of a man that I love so dearly. I followed his story many years ago in the story of John, the Apostle John. Apparently, when he was getting older and he was weaker, they had to carry him to worship every Sunday. And his constant refrain was, my children, love each other. Every single Lord's Day, they would come and speak to him. And he would always tell them, without fail, because it is the Lord's command. And this, if this is only done by us, it is enough. There's another story of love that John personifies. And that's a story, it's been verified through the church fathers, that he had baptized a young man, beautiful young man, and he gave him into the hand of the bishop of the church. And eventually he said to the bishop, he said, please look after my son in the faith. Many years later, John came from Patmos. And John before he went to Patmos, he then came to that particular village. And he looked for this young man, obviously hoping that he would be taller, he'd be older, and he would now be part of the kingdom, working for God's kingdom. And he was nowhere to be found. And he asked them, where is he? And they said, well, he left the fold and he's now in the mountains and he's leading a very violent band. My English and Afrikaans is deur mekaar today. A violent bender. Gang, thank you. And a violent gang. And as he said to them, he says, take me to him. And they said, John, please don't go there. They will kill you. He said, I don't care. Take me to him. He got on a cart and they took him there. And the story goes that as he came there, he asked the people that were now the lookouts toward the den of the gang. They said to him, "Oh man, what are you doing here?" And he said to him, "I'm looking," and he mentioned the young man's name. And the story goes that as he walked toward this young man, the young man saw him coming and he ran. And John, in his weak state as the apostle, ran after him, falling. His knees were broken and it was bleeding, but he carried on running after this young man. He pursued him, and as he pursued him, he continued shouting his name, saying that God loves you. He never would give up on this young man. And eventually, when he got to this young man, he embraced him. And he said, "My son, come home. Come home. Leave this life." You see, brethren, when we look at all these kind of things, even in the John, the apostle that speaks about love more than all the other writings, he exemplified love like Jesus. No wonder he was considered as the favorite of Jesus Christ. Brethren, I want to say to you today, as disciples of Christ, what marks us? What marks us? Just how self-righteous we can be because we know? Or does it mark us that we live out the doctrine of Christ and make it attractive to the world? Do we give them hope? Do we tell them that humanity, although we're living in an environment of mistrust, people can still be trusted? And we choose to trust. We choose to see a better world for everyone. I'm not quite sure where you are this morning, brethren, but sometimes people feel so abandoned. Values are being violated daily. But we are the salt and light to this world. Let's never, ever dim our light and never, ever lose our saltiness. If you need the prayers of the elders, I encourage you to meet with Don and Steve, and they'll spend time with you. If you need prayers, maybe even if you need to turn to Christ today and say, that's me done, I'm in. I want to encourage you to do that as we stand and sing our final song of encouragement this morning.